You can hear the crowd before you see them. A roar that seems to rise from the earth itself, thousands of voices merging into something barely human. You're standing in a cart, hands bound, hair shorn to stubble. The cobblestones jolt beneath you with every turn of the wheel. Around you, faces twist with rage, with satisfaction, with something darker, a hunger that's been building for years and is finally about to be fed. You were a queen yesterday. Today you're 37 years old and you have 20 minutes left to live. Before we step deeper into what really happened in those final hours, and trust me, what history books leave out is more haunting than what they tell, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. It absolutely fascinates me that a woman's last morning in 1793 can still reach across centuries to wherever you are right now. The woman in that cart was Marie Antoinette, and October 16, 1793, was the day the French Revolution devoured its most famous symbol. But here's what makes her story so much more disturbing than the mythology suggests. Almost everything the crowd believed about her was fiction. The lavish spending, the callous indifference, the famous cake, quote, manufactured. Yet the punishment was devastatingly real. What happened to Marie Antoinette wasn't just an execution. It was a systematic destruction of a human being, piece by piece, designed not merely to end a life but to obliterate an identity. And the worst part? We've been telling the sanitized version for so long that we've forgotten how truly terrifying her final year actually was. Marie Antoinette arrived in France at 14, and from that moment she was a foreigner in a court that treated foreignness like a disease. Born Maria Antonia in Vienna, she was the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa, raised in the glittering Habsburg court, where power meant survival and marriage meant alliance. When Austria needed to secure peace with France, they sent their youngest daughter across the border like a diplomatic gift. She wasn't a person. She was a treaty in a white dress. The French court was a machine built to consume outsiders, and it started on her immediately. At the border, they made her strip naked, literally removing every thread of Austrian clothing, every piece of jewelry, every reminder of home before, dressing her in French silk. It was symbolic, brutal, and a preview of what was to come. To survive in Versailles, you had to erase yourself first. She was given a new name, a new language to master, and a new role to play in a theater where one wrong step could ruin you. She was a child trying to navigate a court where adults had been perfecting cruelty for generations. Her husband, the future Louis XVI, was awkward, distant, and far more interested in locks than in his young bride. Their marriage remained unconsummated for 7 years, a fact the entire court knew, whispered about, and blamed on her. Pamphlets circulated questioning her virtue, her fertility, her worth. She was mocked openly. Ladies at court called her the Austrian woman, with barely concealed contempt. She had no allies, no real power, and no escape. So she did what many young people do when trapped. She tried to make her cage beautiful. She spent money on fashion, on parties, on a fantasy world she built at the Petit Trianon, where she could pretend to be a shepherdess instead of a queen under constant surveillance. Modern historians estimate her spending was actually modest compared to previous queens, but perception mattered more than reality. Every dress became evidence of decadence. Every party became proof of indifference. The French people were starving, and whether or not Marie Antoinette was personally responsible became irrelevant. Someone had to be blamed, and she was foreign, female, and visible. A diamond necklace affair of 1785 destroyed whatever goodwill remained. A con artist named Jean de la Motte convinced a cardinal that the queen wanted to secretly purchase an extravagant necklace, forging letters in Marie Antoinette's name to orchestrate an elaborate fraud. When the scheme collapsed, the truth didn't matter. The queen had never seen the necklace, never wanted it, never touched it. But the story was too perfect. The greedy Austrian bankrupting France for jewelry while children starved. The court acquitted her of any involvement, but public opinion had already rendered its verdict: guilty, irredeemably guilty. What's heartbreaking is that Marie Antoinette was actually more politically aware than history gives her credit for. She wrote letters to her brother in Austria, analyzing French political tensions with surprising insight. She advocated for economic reforms. She reduced her household staff and expenses as the financial crisis worsened. None of it mattered. The narrative was set, and in revolutionary France, narrative was more powerful than truth. By 1789, France was a powder keg, and the spark came quickly. Bread prices soared. Unemployment devastated cities. The monarchy's attempts at reform came too late and too timidly. When the Estates General convened that May, it unleashed years of suppressed rage. Within months, a crowd of women marched on Versailles, and the royal family was forced to Paris, ostensibly to be closer to the people, but really to be prisoners in their own capital. Marie Antoinette knew what was coming. In letters to friends, she wrote about her fear, her awareness that she was watching her world end in real time. The attempted escape to Varennes in June 1791 was her family's desperate bid for survival. They nearly made it. Disguised as servants traveling at night, they got within 30 miles of the border before someone recognized the king's face from a coin. That recognition sealed their fate. The revolutionaries had been willing to keep a symbolic constitutional monarchy. After Varennes, the royal family became traitors, and traitors deserve no mercy. They were brought back to Paris under guard, and the humiliation was deliberate. The journey that had taken one night going out took 4 days coming back, the carriage moving slowly so crowds could gather, jeer, and spit. Marie Antoinette aged visibly during those 4 days. People who saw her remarked that her hair had turned completely white. She was 35 and looked a decade older. The abolition of the monarchy in 1792 and the king's execution in January 1793 removed the last buffer between Marie Antoinette and the guillotine. Louis XVI's death was traumatic. She heard the drums from her prison as they announced his beheading, but what followed was calculated torture. The revolutionaries didn't just want her dead, they wanted her destroyed first. They took her children. Her son, Louis Charles, was placed in the custody of a cobbler known for his revolutionary zeal, who was instructed to make the boy forget he'd ever been a prince. Her daughter Marie Therese remained close, but was kept in a separate cell. Marie Antoinette could hear her daughter crying at night through the walls, but was forbidden from seeing her. In August 1793, they moved Marie Antoinette from the Temple prison to the Conciergerie, a medieval fortress repurposed into a revolutionary holding cell for those awaiting execution. Her new cell was 2 meters wide, damp, crawling with rats, and lit by a single barred window too high to see out of. 2 guards watched her constantly, even when she used a chamber pot, even when she changed clothes. Privacy, like dignity, was something they systematically stripped away. She was ill by this point, hemorrhaging constantly from what was likely uterine cancer. She had no medical care, insufficient food, and no way to maintain even basic hygiene. Reports from the time describe her as skeletal, pale, her once beautiful hands gnarled and trembling. She spent her days sitting on a thin mattress, staring at the wall, occasionally writing letters that were confiscated before they could be sent. The only thing they allowed her was her grief. The trial in October was less a judicial proceeding than a public ritual of humiliation. The charges were absurd: conspiracy with foreign powers, treason, theft of state funds. But the most grotesque accusation came from her own son. Under coercion and manipulation, 8-year-old Louis Charles testified that his mother had sexually abused him. The courtroom erupted. Even hardened revolutionaries shifted uncomfortably. It was a lie so vile that it defied human decency, and everyone knew it. Marie Antoinette's response is one of the few moments where the sanitized history actually captures her dignity. She stood visibly shaking and said, "I appeal to all mothers present. Is such a crime possible?" For a brief moment, the room was silent. Women in the gallery wept. Even Robespierre reportedly later criticized the accusation as unnecessarily cruel. But the tribunal was not interested in truth. The verdict was predetermined: death. They gave her less than 24 hours. On the evening of October 15th, she was allowed a priest, not her regular confessor, but a constitutional priest loyal to the revolution. She prayed through the night, wrote a final letter to her sister-in-law forgiving everyone and asking for God's mercy, and cut a lock of her remaining hair to be saved for her children. At 4 a.m, the executioner came to cut her hair short for the blade. She did not resist. The execution was scheduled for midday, not dawn like her husband's, because they wanted the crowds to be larger. She was dressed in a plain white dress, white, the color of mourning for French queens, though whether she chose it or it was chosen for her remains unclear. Her hands were tied behind her back so tightly that witnesses later said her wrists bled. She was placed in a cart, not a carriage, to maximize her humiliation. The route to the Place de la Révolution took over an hour. Every street was packed. People screamed insults, threw refuse, held up grotesque caricatures of her face. She sat upright the entire time, eyes forward, her face a mask of composure. Witnesses disagree about whether she was crying. Some say her face was dry. Others say silent tears ran down her cheeks, which she couldn't wipe away because her hands were bound. Both could be true. At the scaffold, she stepped out of the cart and accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Her last recorded words were an apology. "Pardon me, sir. I did not mean to do it." Even in her final seconds, her royal training held courtesy, even to the man about to kill her. She climbed the steps without assistance, knelt at the block, and the blade fell at 12:15 p.m. The crowd cheered. Her body was thrown into an unmarked mass grave in the Madeleine Cemetery, covered with quicklime to accelerate decomposition. They wanted to erase her even from the earth. Here's what history often omits. Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake." That quote was attributed to her years later by a philosopher who probably invented it. She was not exceptionally extravagant. Financial records show her spending was comparable to or less than previous queens. She did not conspire with Austria in any meaningful way. Intercepted letters show she actually gave her brother advice that hurt Austrian interests. The woman the revolutionaries executed was largely a fiction. But fictions can kill as effectively as facts when a society needs a villain. The psychological devastation of her final year was deliberate. Modern trauma psychologists who have analyzed her documented conditions, isolation, constant surveillance, separation from children, public humiliation, physical illness without treatment, describe it as systematic torture designed to break her mentally before ending her physically. The revolution needed more than her death. It needed her to be seen suffering, to be reduced from queen to broken woman, to prove that monarchy itself could be humiliated into dust. Yet there's a paradox in her final hours. The same crowd that screamed for her blood also contained people who wept. Women who brought their children to see the wicked queen found themselves disturbed by the frail, dignified woman they actually saw. Some guards assigned to mock her found themselves moved by her composure. The revolutionary government had worked so hard to make her a monster that when people saw she was simply human, terrified, mourning, dying, it created a cognitive dissonance that lingered long after the blade fell. Her daughter Marie Therese survived, the only member of the immediate family to do so. Years later, after the monarchy was restored, she wrote about her mother's final months, with a clarity born from having heard everything through prison walls. She described her mother's courage, her prayers, the way she sang softly at night when she thought no one was listening. She also described the guilt she carried, survivor's guilt. We'd call it now, for having lived when everyone she loved had been destroyed. The French revolutionaries tried to erase Marie Antoinette, but erasure rarely works as planned. Within decades, she had transformed from villain to martyr, her suffering recast as noble tragedy. Romantic writers painted her as a victim of mob violence. Monarchists used her execution as proof of revolutionary barbarism. The truth, as always, was more complex. She was neither the demon of revolutionary propaganda nor the saint of royalist mythology. She was a woman born into impossible circumstances, who made mistakes, showed kindness, loved her children, and died badly. What makes her story still matter is what it reveals about how societies create scapegoats. When systems fail, economic collapse, political corruption, social inequality, people need someone to blame. Marie Antoinette was convenient, foreign, feminine, visible, voiceless in her own defense. The lies told about her were believed not because they were true, but because people needed them to be true. Her destruction allowed France to avoid confronting the deeper, more uncomfortable truth that their suffering had complex causes no single execution could fix. In the conciergerie, now a museum, you can still visit the cell where she spent her final days. It's been reconstructed, sanitized, turned into a tourist attraction with explanatory plaques and mood lighting. But if you stand there quietly, you can almost feel the weight of those walls, the suffocating awareness that every dawn might be your last, the special horror of being famous and utterly alone. They have her last letter behind glass now, the one they confiscated and never delivered. Her handwriting still clear after more than 2 centuries. I die innocent of all the crimes imputed to me. Innocent or guilty, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that a human being spent her last months in a cell 2 meters wide, watching everything she loved be systematically destroyed before they destroyed her body. What matters is that we remember it happened not because of who she was, but because of who people needed her to be. What matters is that we still do this, create villains from complexity, demand simple answers to complicated failures, punish symbols when we can't fix systems. Marie Antoinette's ghost doesn't haunt Versailles or the Petit Trianon. those beautiful places she tried to make into refuges. If her ghost haunts anywhere, it's that small cell in the conciergerie, and it asks the same question to everyone who visits. How much of what you believe about me is true? And if it's not true, why did you need to believe it anyway? The answer to that question is more terrifying than anything that happened on the scaffold, because it means we're all capable of doing to someone else exactly what was done to her, if the story we tell ourselves is compelling enough, and the fear is great enough, and the need for someone to blame becomes overwhelming. She died at 12:15 in the afternoon, and the crowd went home for lunch. That's how quickly martyrdom becomes mundane, how efficiently terror becomes routine. They buried her in quicklime to speed her disappearance, but you can't erase a person that thoroughly. She remains, not in the propaganda or the portraits, but in the warning. Look carefully at who your society has decided to destroy, and ask yourself what purpose that destruction serves. Because Marie Antoinette's real crime wasn't anything she did. It was existing at a moment when France needed a villain more than it needed the truth. And that's a crime any of us could commit, simply by being in the wrong place when history decides it needs someone to blame.